If you're into old SNES style RPG music, leave a like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Good morning, everyone. I have to confess, I actually recorded this video before, but I do have to record it again because when I first recorded it, my camera actually had the light on the whole time and it made my eyes look like demons. But here's a Q&A I thought it would be fun to do. So because I recorded this later, I managed to get more questions in this time. Well, I will manage to get more questions in this time. But basically I put a question up on Twitter as well as YouTube community asking if you had to ask me something, what would you want to ask? I thought, yeah, it would be kind of cool to get to know me a little bit better. So the first question comes from Twitter. Somebody named Mikan Ghoulkiwi. Hopefully I said that right. Question 1. What is the most interesting aspect of making high quality SNES music? Where do you get the inspiration for it? So to answer that question, the coolest aspect is just kind of hearing the extra frequencies that the music actually provides when you're using the samples, when they're not, down sampled or the sample rate isn't compromised because it has to fit in within 64K of memory. Somebody will say, I didn't know that there was a guitar in that. Or for example, Final Fantasy VI's victory theme. Victory theme. Somebody said, I didn't know there was a guitar in that song. It was there. It could have also been some bad mixing on my part, but yeah, you could hear it a lot clearer in the restoration. Question 2, name me your top 5 game composers. I will not name my top 5. I will name as many as that come up the top of my head, but I do love a lot of composers. First one, of course, is Nobuo Uematsu. Second one, Yasunori Mitsuda. Hiroki Kikuta, Yu Shimoda, Yuzo Koshiro, of course. Who else? Noriyuki Iwadare. Whoever made the music for Lufia. Yasunari Shiono. There's so many others. David Wise, of course. See, now I'm gonna get in trouble for not name dropping anybody, but yeah, I have a few. Second question from Twitter, from Parker Simmons. What's your dream gig? If you could completely invent a job, what would it be? I'd like to be a sound engineer for a popular game composer. So for example, one of my dream gigs has always been wanting to engineer a new Super Nintendo soundtrack for Nobuo Uematsu. So now, ever since he moved to PlayStation, he doesn't have limitations anymore. There are some songs that he's made in the PlayStation that try to have those limitations. For example, when he tried to make like 8-bit music again in Final Fantasy VII. But I honestly think like limitations spring creativity. And I honestly believe that if he were to make 16-bit music now, forcing to be creative, he would create probably one of his biggest masterpieces again. Right now, I personally think it's Final Fantasy VI, even with all the other stuff that's come out, even within the last 25 years. I still think Final Fantasy VI is his grand, amazing soundtrack. Bigg Sweaty from YouTube asks, I love SNES music as well. Can't really explain why, other than it's fantastic and I grew up with it. I'd like to know why you love it. Good question. I'm gonna answer that later. Orsi from Twitter asks, has doing all this work restoring songs to their original samples helped in your own compositions? If so, how and in what ways? Examples, structure, melodies, sound design, etc. I don't think it helped at all with my original compositions, honestly. I think mostly working with the original samples and the original soundtracks from Square's early days kind of makes me retroactively feel like I was there, especially when I see how the sounds were edited and stuff. I kind of imagine what they went through to make all those sounds work, because some of those samples they've used definitely had to have been altered to work on the Super Nintendo, whether it's EQ or shortening the sample to make it fit. And it still had to sound good, and that was one thing Square's composers and sound engineers were great at, was making samples sound good on the Super Nintendo, even though they didn't have a lot of memory. Not a lot of composers were able to do that on the Super Nintendo, to be honest. A lot of stuff used to sound super muddy. But Orsi, to answer your question, I don't think it's changed my composing capability. I don't think I'm a very good composer personally. That's why I mostly do remasters and remixes and stuff like that, but eventually I'll start getting into composing again. Janus Zeal asks 4 questions. The low-hanging fruit, in your opinion, what game has the best OST? If I had to limit it to Super Nintendo music, Final Fantasy VI was one of the best soundtracks, very close Chrono Trigger second. What's your favorite OST? Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy V and VI had great melodies. They followed conventional stories more, but I think Final Fantasy IV just had like that initial wow factor, like wow, the Super Nintendo can have this kind of music that really pushes a story. That being said, you can't really downplay any of the other games. Like Super Castlevania 4 used samples in such a way that you wouldn't think the Super Nintendo could even do. In fact, it barely used echo because it basically used almost every single byte that there was in the Super Nintendo RAM. ActRaiser, Yuzo Koshiro, inspired so many musicians on that era, where initially, like for example, Nobuo Uematsu mentioned that he went back and changed all of his samples for Final Fantasy IV because ActRaiser impressed him so much. Question 3, what game's OST is the most important? I think I answered that same question in question 2. Question 4, what game's OST did you learn the most from? To be honest, it would have to be either Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, mostly because it taught me how to use a lot of the special features that the SPC 700 module could use, and it also taught me how different and intricate samples can be and how versatile they can be. Next question from YouTube. RF asks, what do you think about video game rips? It depends on what you mean by rips. I know there's this alternate meaning behind rips. Rips will and always mean that you're taking the sequence from the game and you're extracting them. So for example, VGM Trans is a ripping software. People use it as a joke for certain YouTube channels. Don't get me wrong, they're great, but that's not their original meaning. Like some people don't know that it's like using sound font when what you really mean is like a game's sound design, right? Sound font is a sound file. Rip is when you take something from a game and you're able to analyze it, like when you're ripping music from a game or something like that. What do I think of it? I think it's not a bad idea. Obviously, I use it for 90% of my remixes because I want to make sure that the music I'm making is accurate. That being said, if there is no original music sequence for it, then I will remake it by ear. I've been doing that for the last 20 to 30 years. But what can I say? It's a great way to preserve music. Like, I don't want to throw anybody at Squaresoft under the bus or Square Enix now. Like when you can't even keep your original files safe from being lost in a fire or a backup, or not even archiving them correctly, and people have to reverse engineer a game 25 to 30 years later because you don't have the source code or the original files anymore. I mean, I know people who have archived some of the stuff from 30 years ago, their original project files. They don't work anymore because they don't have the same samples, but I mean, at least you still have the sequence. You don't have to remake it. And then the remake is, not accurate because you couldn't save the original sequence. Metro Android on YouTube asks, okay, so this was one of the ones that I ended up throwing in here because, I had to re-record the video. Dang, I was taking my time thinking of some questions, then see that you've already recorded it. Well, I didn't. What was the first software you used to compose or arrange music? Scream Tracker. That was on DOS. Didn't have a sound card. I used the PC speaker. And I used this weird little parallel port Disney thing that my brother had on his computer, plugged into the back, and I don't know, it put out really bad 8-bit music, but it still worked. Then of course, Impulse Tracker came out by Jeffrey Lim, and my dad got a Sound Blaster Pro, and guess what I used? What track do you think benefited most from being remastered? A lot of people are saying that Final Fantasy VII's Mako Reactor benefited the most. I think it did. I still think I could probably mix it better because it was done before I was able to get some of the higher quality plugins. But yeah, I think that one just shows how much the samples had to be edited for the PlayStation. Like even though the PlayStation had more memory, 512 kilobytes to work with, you still had to technically, people use the word compression, It's not compression. I mean, yes, it's compressed to a BRR file, or Super Nintendo samples are BRR, PlayStation are just a different form of BRR. Yeah, it had to be edited to fit into memory, and I think the original samples helped that song a lot. Which track was the most difficult or time-consuming? And he puts in brackets One Winged Angel. I've remade One Winged Angel a minimum of 10 times. I'm not even joking right now. For example, I remade it in Impulse Tracker format, playing back from a badly recorded cassette tape because the song had leaked online. I remember getting it from somebody through IRC. I was in my parents' living room with a computer set up. I don't know why it was set up there. I can't remember. I think I was trying to learn how surround sound worked with my dad's stereo, but I still had a little ghetto blaster playing back the music, and I kind of did it by ear. It was bad, terrible bad. I didn't have any of the original samples, and the vocals I recorded off of from a really bad microphone and stuff. So favorite sample, I always said that if I would ever meet Nobuo Uematsu and I had like something with me, it would be a picture of the Final Fantasy VII crash cymbal, because I always thought it was so lush and thick, the way it sounded, like it's, I don't know, anyways. So I guess that would be my favorite sample. Favorite VGM arrangement album? That would be Hiroki Kikuta's Secret of Mana Genesis. I think it was one of the biggest inspirations for Synthetic Origins. Even though it didn't use most of the original samples, it still sounded like a restored album of Secret of Mana music. Colin Kok from Twitter asks, hello and good day, TSSF. For those who don't know, TSSF is my online handle. I've been using it for the last 30 years. It means the Super Street Fighter. I got to know about your works and passion for digital music back then in 1997 or 98 when I discovered the unofficial Squaresoft music page, unofficial Squaresoft homepage. Which Final Fantasy series or non-Square RPG you loved? Lufia and Lunar. There's probably others I can't think of right now. 2. Which music piece was the most challenging one to track on Impulse Tracker? Just to get back to that, I think One Winged Angel was pretty hard when I was remaking it from scratch. At one point, I figured out how to isolate the channels for PlayStation through Pete Sound plugin. So I very slowly recorded all 16 channels of the PlayStation that was playing it back. Imagine recording 16 channels with a 4-minute song. So what, 4 times 16? And then I remade it from that. So I think that was one of the hardest for sure. What motivates you to do digital music tracking? I just like the idea of analyzing and learning musicians' compositional styles and stuff just by remaking their music. I think it's really cool and kind of puts me in a mindset of trying to, make music somewhat similar to theirs. Although I'll never be as good as a composer, I still think it's super fun to kind of be in their head and what they were making, Do you still keep in touch with people who does Square digital music tracking? I do. I keep track of some people. We don't talk that often, but we're still like friends on Twitter and stuff. What is your hope for the future on Square RPG music? I don't really have a hope other than just keep making awesome music and make it unique. An anonymous man asks, it'd be nice if you told us about your favorite orchestral patches of hard synths or samples that were actually used in famous SFC games. Good night. I mentioned on Twitter I had to re-record the video and I couldn't that night because I was tired. Orchestral samples. It is amazing to hear like full-length samples when they're not edited to be short, I think some of the most surprising samples were like the Dulcimer from Final Fantasy VI, or I think what I thought was a dulcimer for Chrono Trigger, but it wasn't. It was actually like a super high note of the 12-string guitar on the EMU Emulator 3, which was used in Chrono Trigger, right? Another one would be a shocking one from the Korg M1. When I was playing in the Korg M1 plugin, I heard a really familiar sound when I started playing the higher notes of a guitar sample. And then I realized that's what Final Fantasy IV considers a piano. So I just think it's really cool how a lot of the more intricate samples that were used for other things that were originally based on other sounds. So that's hard to explain, but Justin Kahn from Twitter asks, where would you like to see yourself go creatively over the next 5 to 10 years? Continuing with Synthetic Origins, perhaps more original compositions? I'm pretty sure Synthetic Origins will either end at the end of Chrono Trigger or the end of Final Fantasy VII. Am I doing a full synthetic origins for Final Fantasy VII? Maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of music in Final Fantasy VII. We're talking 4 discs worth of music. But where do I want to see myself in 5 to 10 years? I want to be in sound editing of some sort, sound engineering of some sort. I still want to continue doing what I'm doing, but like, we're talking, that's when I'm like turning 46, and I don't know, like, am I going to still be able to do this stuff? Will I still have hearing at that point? Will I have a family? I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I can't tell the future. Nobody can. Georgie asks, favorite soundtrack that makes use of the SC-88? Well, obviously it's going to be this one. Turcopolis, one of the old music friends I had on IRC back in the day, asks on Twitter, I would say, do you have any memories of or comments about your contributions to the unofficial Squaresoft homepage, later known as RP Gamer? That was the place I first heard and appreciated your work, as I was a budding tracker. Oh, it was mind-blowing. No, not really. There was some bad experiences with RP Gamer. I used to know somebody who was running it, and I guess maybe we had a feud or something, so they took all my music off of it. Then we made up, and then they started slowly putting some stuff back. Then, of course, RP Gamer turned into kind of a different site, didn't really host the music that much anymore. But I don't really have a lot. I do remember remaking Final Fantasy VII's battle theme when it first came out, and Andrew Vestal left a note or changed the IRC topic or something to say, fix the trumpets in it or something like that. I don't know. But yeah. We're talking like 20, 30 years ago. I can't remember all that stuff. I can barely remember some of the people who still talk to me. That's pretty bad on my part. My memory is terrible. Vince94 asks, I'd like you to talk about how you discovered the online community surrounding Chrono Trigger, SNES music, etc. Got involved with it. I talk about my experiences with Starman.net, and I imagine that you'd have a similar story. It was mostly along the lines of, I remade music, I wanted people to listen to it, I didn't know how to spread it online. Of course, I spread it on the unofficial Squaresoft page, but then I saw that there was an IRC channel, so I didn't know what IRC was. I heard it was like an online chat, so I thought I'd try it out, why not? And then I met a lot of people there, some people who are still my closest friends today. That being said, on Twitter, I started I think in 2010, I can't remember, but I didn't want to really get into the Twitter community. Then I realized, like, mid 2010s, that the best way for me to interact with a lot of the old musicians that I used to love was to be involved in Twitter. And the only way to do that was to post more or reply more or get my stuff known more, right? But I would say that IRC was a huge thing. That's how I met a lot of close friends. That's how I met Eric Hache, really close musician friend that I've known for over 30 years. That's how I don't think I met Nathan Lazur there, actually. Nathan Lazur was the gentleman who I contacted through GameSpot magazine. He posted something about Chrono Trigger 64, so I told him, hey, I'd love to make the music for it. And then apparently he knew who I was because he listened to a lot of my remakes and stuff. That's how Chrono Resurrection was created as well. Yeah, now on Twitter, I try to do my best to be as vocal as I can with some people. Yuzo Koshiro on Twitter asks... I was just joking about earlier, by the way. He was the one who wanted me to talk about the orchestral sample. He mentioned, just my curiosity, I'd like to ask why you're so obsessed with Super Nintendo. Good question. Why am I obsessed with Super Nintendo? I think it's because when I was a kid, I loved NES music. Like, I used to love Mega Man music. I still love Mega Man music. I used to love just the way happy melodies used to make me feel and things like that. And then when the Super Nintendo came and I heard what it could do compared to the Nintendo, I was blown away. Like, I used to play Final Fantasy IV up until I got to Zeromus. I would use the crystal on him. The crystal would transform him. Everything would go dark. And then I would pause it. And there's a glitch in the game that would play the music and sound at full volume even though it was paused, and I would just blast that music and let the chills take over. Like, that was the experience I loved with the Super Nintendo. I love the way the echo phases with the samples, like with trumpets and stuff like that. I love the way that you can make it essentially sound like anything you want. I just love the fact that there's only 8 channels, although sometimes I wish there was more channels. But I do love the way it squishes all the frequencies into a certain frequency response that the Super Nintendo plays back. And it's so hard to explain. It just, I don't know, it blows me away because everything seems to sing in harmony with it. That being said, once I met David Viens and Plogue and I started playing with FM, I had a huge respect for FM music. Back in the day, I used to play PC music through my old Adlib, Space Quest, and used to be one of the songs I used to blast. I don't know, it was super fun. Well guys, I really appreciate it. I hope we can do this Q&A again. Maybe we'll make it a once a month thing. I don't know, what do you think? Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much. And yeah, I'll continue with the remakes and the remasters and stuff. And I'm gonna try to post some more stuff non-music related. When I say that, I mean like post some more stuff that shows like tips and tricks and sound editing tools and things like that. We'll see you later, and if you're celebrating the long weekend, happy long weekend. Take care.